Hi everyone, I'm back to read the next chapter, chapter 3, called Second Chances of Happy Birthday Josefina, a Springtime Story, Book 4, set in 1824. And here we go. Chapter 3, called Second Chances. When they were seated with their tea and some sweet cookies, Tia Magdalena said, "You've done well today." "Gracias," said Josefina. "I was glad to help." She sipped her hot mint tea and gathered her courage to say what she was thinking. "I've really enjoyed all of this afternoon," she said, "and I was thinking that I'd like to be a curandera when I am older." Tia Magdalena studied Josefina's face as she listened. Josefina was encouraged. "Do you think you could teach me?" she asked. "When I'm old enough, I mean. I know I'm too young now." Tia Magdalena thought for a while. Then she answered. Her voice was kind. "You can't simply choose to be a curandera," she said. "You have to know which herbs cure which ills, and you have to be observant and careful. And more than all of that, you must be a healer." "A healer?" repeated Josefina. "How will I know if I'm a healer or not?" "You'll know," said Tia Magdalena. "You'll know. It will be clear to you and everyone else if you are." Josefina sighed. I hope I am," she said. "You'll find out," said Tia Magdalena, "in time." And while Tia Magdalena cleared up after their tea, Josefina went back to the storeroom to finish dusting. All the while, she was remembering that Tia Magdalena had said. How she wished there were some way to prove to Tia Magdalena that she was the right kind of person to be a curandera. Josefina looked at the big blue and white jar on the shelf and thought about how it had been handed down from curandera to curandera. The jar was dusty. Surely Tia Magdalena would be pleased if she dusted it as a surprise for her. Josefina stood on her tiptoes to take the jar off the shelf. She could reach it with only one hand. She tapped the jar to move it to the edge of the shelf so that she could lift it off with both hands, and crash! The jar fell to the floor and smashed into 1,000 pieces. Josefina's heart stopped beating for a terrible moment. She stood still, staring in horror at what she had done. Then, without thinking, Josefina ran from the room. She flew past Tia Magdalena out the door and ran away as fast as she could. Shame, shame, shame. The word pounded in Josefina's head with every step she took. Josefina ran without thinking, about where she was going. Faster and faster she ran, out of the village, up the road to the rancho, toward the house until she came to the orchard. She climbed up into her favorite apricot tree. Its branches were thickening with buds. There were no blossoms to hide Josefina. How could she have been so clumsy? She thought of how Tia Magdalena treasured the blue and white jar, and I destroyed it. Then I ran away. What a stupid, childish thing to do. Not like a girl who's nearly 10. I'll never be able to face Tia Magdalena again. Josefina clung to the tree, and hot tears ran down her cheeks. She had been sitting that way a while when she heard someone say, "Josefina?" Josefina looked down through the branches and saw Tia Dolores's face lifted toward her. Josefina felt as if all her bones had melted. She slid down from the tree right into Tia Dolores's arms and buried her face in Tia Dolores's shoulder. Then she cried and cried. Tia Dolores rubbed her back and let her cry. And when at last her sobs stopped, Tia Dolores put a cool hand on Josefina's cheek and looked at her with sympathetic eyes. "Your papa went to Tia Magdalena's house to walk home with you," said Tia Dolores. "She told him what had happened, and he told me. Is Tia Magdalena angry? Asked Josefina. And Papa too? Tia Dolores smoothed Josefina's hair and said, "They're sad and disappointed," Josefina finished for her. Roughly, Josefina's wiped the tears off her cheeks. "I broke Tia Magdalena's most precious jar. Then I made it worse by running away. I ruined everything." "Everything?" asked Tia Magdalena. Josefina was so ashamed and miserable she could hardly speak. "I was hoping Tia Magdalena would teach me to be a curander when I am old enough," Josefina said. "Now she won't want to." I see," said Tia Dolores. "Can you tell me why you want to be a curandera?" "It's hard to explain," said Josefina. She put her hand on her pouch and felt the root Tia Magdalena had given her. "I like helping people feel better, and I've always wondered if the reason why Mama chose Tia Magdalena to be my godmother. Maybe Mama hoped that I could be a curandera." "You mean maybe she had the same hope for you that you have for yourself," said Tia Dolores. She hugged Josefina and said, "You know what you must do now, don't you?" "See," said Josefina. "Sweep up the mess I made and apologize to Tia Magdalena." "And you must ask her to give you a second chance," said Tia Dolores. Josefina sighed hopelessly. Tia Dolores bent down so that her eyes were level with Josefina's. "Spring is the season for second chances," she said. "Didn't your mama's flowers sprout again? Didn't Sombrita get another chance to live when you promised to take care of her?" Tia Dolores smiled. "We're all given second chances. We just have to be brave enough to take them." Josefina hugged Tia Dolores. She hoped Tia Dolores was right. Oh, if Tia Magdalena would give her a second chance, she would be so grateful. Tia Magdalena had only one thing to say after Josefina apologized. "The jar cannot be repaired," she said, "but perhaps your hopes can." And whenever Josefina made up her mind to do something, it cheered her. She felt awful about what she had done at Tia Magdalena's, but she wasn't going to let her mistake kill her hopes. She still wanted to be a healer. Tia Magdalena had said that it would be clear to her and to everyone else if she was. She was determined to find out. Josefina kept the root that Tia Magdalena had given her in her pouch as a reminder to herself. It was cold and rainy. It seemed as if the winter had returned. But finally, just the day before Josefina's birthday, the clouds brightened the gray to white and the sun shone. It was spring morning full of promise. Josefina set out with Papa and his servant Miguel to go to the pueblo. Papa and Miguel were leading mules that were loaded down with blankets. The mules kicked up a lot of mud, so the blankets were wrapped in cloths to protect them. The path to the pueblo wound its way next to the stream. The banks were dotted with wildflowers. In the trees above, the birds sang loudly, trying to outdo each other. Josefina couldn't help feeling proud when she looked at the blankets. She had made some of them, and now Papa was going to trade them to his friend Esteban. Josefina had another reason to be happy. She was going to see her friend Mariana, Esteban's granddaughter. Josefina had tucked her doll, Nina, into her sash because Mariana liked to play dolls. And of course she'd brought along her faithful little shadow, Sombrita, to meet Mariana. The pueblo was 5 long miles downstream from the rancho, and after the first mile, Sombrito lagged. Josefina had to pick her up and carry her. Josefina was relieved when the stream widened and the pueblo seemed to appear all of a sudden. It rose up between the stream and the mountains. The pueblo was made of adobe, just as Josefina's house was, but it was much taller than Josefina's house because several stories were built one on top of the other. Ladders led from level to level. And when Papa, Josefina, and Miguel arrived at the pueblo, They entered its big clean sweep center plaza. There they were greeted by small children and curious dogs. Sombrita was timid. She hid her face in the crook of Josefina's elbow. Esteban met them at his doorway. "Welcome," he said to Papa. "Gracias, my friend," answered Papa. "May God bless you." Miguel began to unload the blankets from the mules. Sombrita stayed with Miguel as Esteban led Papa and Josefina inside. They sat down by the fire, and almost immediately Mariana and her grandmother appeared with bowls of food. There were little pies with fruit inside and cups of hot tea. Mariana didn't say anything, but she smiled shyly at Josefina, and her eyes had a welcoming in them. Josefina smiled back. Both girls knew they shouldn't speak unless one of the grown-ups asked them a question. It wouldn't be good manners. As they ate, Papa and Esteban talked about the weather, their crops, and their animals. Papa told Esteban about the meeting the village men had held to hear how much water each one could be allowed to use from the Aquitas. Esteban told Papa how much wool the spring sheep shearing had brought. And even though both men knew Papa had come to trade, they didn't talk about it. To begin by talking about business would be rude. Sometimes the two men just sat together in a comfortable silence. They seemed to have all the time in the world. But Josefina was impatient. She couldn't wait to show Sombrita to Mariana. Josefina tried to sit as still as her friend did, but it was very hard. At last, Papa and Esteban finished their food. As Mariana and her grandmother removed their bowls, Josefina admired the way Mariana moved so gracefully in her soft deerskin moccasins. Mariana wore a beautiful blanket wrapped around over one shoulder and belted into a woven sash. Her bangs fell on her eyebrows, and her dark hair framed her face. "My friend," said Esteban, "thank you for bringing the blankets." "Thank you for accepting them," said Papa. "I've brought 60. "Good," said Esteban. "When the sheep are old enough, I'll drive them to your rancho." Papa nodded. This was the way he and Esteban had always traded. Nothing was written. Esteban's spoken promise was enough. Papa said that his family and Esteban's family had always respected each other and traded with each other fairly. Josefina knew that this summer both Papa and Esteban were going to trade for the first time with the Americanos, who came to Santa Fe from the United States. Papa planned to trade mules, and Esteban would trade the blankets that Josefina and Papa had brought to him today. "I hope trading with the Americanos will be a good thing," Papa said. Esteban nodded to show that he shared Papa's hope. Then Mariana caught her grandfather's eye, and he smiled. Both Josefina and Mariana knew that was a sign that they could go. They stood up eagerly and hurried outside into the sunshine. Josefina picked up Sombrita and held her to face Mariana. "This is my Sombrita," she said. "We call her that because she follows me like a shadow wherever I go." "Oh," sighed Mariana. Her eyes were wide with delight. She scratched Sombrita behind her ear, just where the little goat liked it best. "Will Sombrita follow us to the stream?" Mariana asked. "Of course," said Josefina. "Watch." As Josefina and Mariana walked toward the stream, they peeked over their shoulder from time to time and shared a giggle at the sight of Sombrita following right on their heels. And when they reached the stream, the girls found a sunny spot to play. Sombrita curled up in the warm grass and went to sleep. Josefina took her doll Nina out of her sash, and Mariana had a doll too, made out of corn husks. The girls pretended that their dolls were sisters. They made necklaces for them out of tiny wildflowers and boats from curved bark. They had just launched their boats into the stream when suddenly Josefina stood up. "Where is Sombrita?" she asked Mariana. "I don't see her." Mariana stood up, too. The girls shaded their eyes and looked all around, but the little black and white goat was nowhere to be seen. "We'll have to look for her," said Josefina. "She can't have gone very far." She tucked Nina into her sash, and Mariana picked up her doll, and they walked along the narrow footpath that led downstream. Josefina hoped that they were going in the right direction. She could still see the pueblo behind them, but it seemed to shrink smaller with every step they took. Both girls knew that they should not be so far from the pueblo, but they had to find little Sombrita. They couldn't stop. The farther they went, the faster they walked, and the more worried they both became. Neither girl said anything for a long while. Then Josefina spoke as if she were thinking out loud. "Sombrita's not lost," she said, trying not to sound shaky. "She's not lost until we stop trying to find her." With anxious steps, the girls kept going. Just after they passed around the next bend in the path, Josefina squinted. She thought she saw something black and white in the grass ahead. Could it be? It was. Josefina's heart lifted. "Oh, Sombrita," she cried as she ran forward. Sombrita didn't look at her. The goat was staring at something else with friendly curiosity, as if it might be a delightful new plaything. When Josefina saw what it was, she stopped short. All her relief turned to horror. Between her and the little goat was a huge rattlesnake. Josefina swallowed hard. She felt sweat on her forehead and an odd trembling in her stomach. The snake was coiled and ready to strike. Josefina heard its eerie rattle. She knew its scary, skinny tongue darting in and out of its mouth. She saw the snake's beady black eyes in their sunken sockets. Josefina bit her lip. The snake's cruel stare was fixed on Sombrita. All right, and that was the end of chapter 3. Next time we'll read chapter 4 called Rattlesnake. And we'll be back then.